Chapter 15, Social Influences on Consumer Behavior. When we're talking about social influences, we're talking about any type of information that can have influence on others. In terms of information, it can come from people, which you may associate with it being a social influence, but it can be any form of media as well. So one of the things, or when we focus on two specific dimensions in particular, is looking at the source and its credibility. Going back to chapter 5, if a source is credible, then it is more likely to be persuasive, perhaps in influencing or changing certain attitudes or beliefs. And a source of information can be have stronger influence if it has the capability of being disseminated to many people, if it can be communicated widely. So when we look at how and examining different types of sources, particularly social media, what many people fail to realize is to look at it and say, we're sending it out to a lot of people, but how influential is that information? Is it actually reaching people? Do people perceive the information as being credible? And ideally, if it can, is there the opportunity for two-way dialogue or two-way interaction? And this will determine the degree of influence, because you could potentially put a message out and reach many people. But if it's not very influential, then the net gain really may not be much. So in looking at the sources of influence, this particular graph or 2x2 framework becomes critical. Please review it and understand it and look at the different examples provided in your book. This 2x2 framework basically kind of puts the dimensions around sources of influence so that you could actually look and compare different types of media, different types of sources of influence, and say, how effective is it? If we look at the gold colored boxes versus the blue or teal colored boxes, the one difference of how they differ as far as in their influence is that the non-marketer dominated sources have higher credibility than the marketer dominated sources. Well, a fundamental question is why? Many people would say that the non-marketer dominated sources are more trustworthy. They are more likely to be looking out for my interests. They perhaps know my needs, and they're going to give me information that's helpful to me without some other ulterior motive. Whereas potentially people in the marketer dominated source or sources of information may be perceived with slightly more skepticism. So again, that information is not going to be necessarily as readily accepted as in the gold area as it would be in the blue area. The other dimension to look at is the degree of reach. And those that are mass media delivered overall will have a higher reach than those that are delivered personally, because they're able to reach out and touch and connect with, potentially, or at least be exposed to many more people. So in looking at these particular dimensions and understanding this, those sources that have high credibility and high reach, both, are potentially the most powerful or the most influential sources, which would suggest that those items or those particular sources of information in box 3 can be highly influential. Another aspect to look at is the ability for two-way communication. Two-way communication, as far as source of influence, the greater the two-way communication, also potentially the greater amount of influence, because you're able to customize and tailor that information to meet the needs of the individual. So in looking at the new social media, one thing to look at is where do these particular the social media, as far as tweets, blogs, Facebook, customer reviews of products on a company's website, where do they fall? Where would you put them on that particular dimension? And the answer to that question is it depends. How would you define it? Is it a marketer or non-marketer dominated resource? Is it mass media delivered, one way of communication, or is it delivered personally?